Yeah, welcome to another exchanging notes session with Youth Music. I'm Phoebe, Programme Officer in the grants team, and this will be with Rachel Atkinson from People Choreographer, and it's on setting and maintaining boundaries. All the usual Zoom admin. I'm here if you need to chat about any sort of technical stuff. And yeah, closed captions have been enabled, and all the usual access stuff with if you need to move around, cameras on or off. We are quite flexible with that, of course. It's lovely to see people's faces, but I totally understand if you don't want to be on camera. And yes, so I've said that I've pressed record, and I'm just going to let this person in. I'm pretty much going to pass over to Rachel. I think that's kind of all I needed to say. We'll do some questions at the end, and if any questions pop up in the meantime, feel free to pop them in the chat. Or I think Rachel's happy for you to raise your hand and kind of interrupt if it's like relevant there and then. But yes, I will pass over to Rachel. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phoebe. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session on setting and maintaining boundaries. It's really great to see you all. I did another session with Youth Music last week, and it's really great. Last week, people interacted and asked questions, and that does make it a bit more exciting than just listening to me for the whole hour. So I'd encourage you to do that if you wish, but there's absolutely no pressure to. I call myself a people choreographer. It's just a very funky way of saying I'm an HR consultant. I'm not really a fan of the term HR. It sounds a bit dull and like the fun police, and I try not to be the fun police, although I think people still think I am sometimes. And I'm a big fan of dance, and it just took one day I've had this realization that I work with lots of organisations that spend lots of money on change and trying to take people on a journey, and they're really rubbish at it. Whereas when you're teaching people to dance and you put them front and centre, and you adapt to their style, actually you can get much more out of them. So that's where I sort of saw the correlation between what I do and what organisations are trying to do, and dance. So hence I became a people choreographer rather than just a boring HR consultant. Right, let's start sharing some screens. So a quick welcome, and yeah, I think setting and maintaining boundaries, I like to think about it as like respect, rhythm and resilience in the workplace. That's what we're looking for. A few ground rules, which hopefully are quite straightforward. So obviously sort of respect for other people. People have different opinions and we're happy for people to share them. And confidentiality, there are sometimes when I run sessions that people share things that are obviously just relevant for them, so feel free, please don't share outside of this session. And participation completely up to you, but whether you want to sort of raise your hand and be invited to speak or use the chat, that would be really welcome. Although I will just say that I'm not very good at presenting and reading the chat at the same time, so bear with me on that. And accessibility is really important to me. So if there's anything that I can do to make things more accessible, then please let me know. But I know that Youth Music are really good at doing that up front anyway. And finally, the slides will be shared following the session, and they also have all of my notes on. So don't feel like you have to write down everything that I say. There will be notes following this. So quick overview of the objectives. We're going to talk about why boundaries matter and for well-being, which is the main one, and also for teamwork. We're going to look at different types of boundaries and get you to think about the sort of boundaries that you hold. And then we're going to do a little bit of practice in setting boundaries. Any questions initially? Okay. So first of all, why do boundaries matter? We live in a very overwhelming age. There's information everywhere. There's lots of expectations. So it's really important that we put some boundaries in place a lot of it is to prevent burnout and stress, and stop ourselves getting overwhelmed. But also if we're able to recognise and manage our boundaries, then it can really help our relationships with people. It can boost clarity, help develop trust if you know where you stand with people, and that develops mutual respect. And in the workplace particular, I mean, I'll talk mainly about in the workplace, but obviously this stands for in sort of your private life or other things that you're involved with as well. And I do like to think about it, using a dance metaphor, which, if you sort of think about boundaries are like your dance floor, that if you have the right size and give the right rules, then everyone gets their space to shine. So notice there's a chat, so I'm just gonna make sure. Thank you for sharing. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm not missing anything in the chat. Okay, so in terms of different types of boundaries, as we go through, I'm just going to ask you to think about which one of these really resonate with you, and which one you sort of think that yeah, you may sort of want some help with developing. So one of the sort of main ones I come up across is time boundaries. And this can be everything from finishing work on time, protecting break times. How many of us think, oh, it's okay, I'll just sit and eat my lunch at my desk, and oh, if I need to get that done, I'll just eat into my lunch hour, pardon the pun. And so that's quite often a common one that comes up. Also things like setting realistic response times to either emails or messages. Again, if you're one of the, I am very much, I've had to train myself to think just because someone's emailed me, I do not have to respond straight away. When you run your own business, you, especially in the beginning, you think you need to do everything straight away, but then you realize that that's not everyone's expectations. Scheduling focus time for uninterrupted work. And because, again, that's something that particularly if you're in a physical workspace can be a real sort of boundary breach sometimes. Trying to avoid last minute or urgent requests, so again sort of setting time aside for things. Again, something that I find people do increasingly with really good intentions, but it's not really always good for them, is not taking their annual leave properly, so thinking that they need to check in. People go into unnecessary meetings, either for fear they're going to miss out something, or just some people just like to invite everyone along to things and when it's not always necessary. Making sure that you do block time out. So, if you're not blocking time out for any sort of creative thinking or rest. Also things like keeping your professional and your personal time separate. And just really thinking about, actually, I had a conversation with a client yesterday, and we were having this challenge around they support vulnerable people, and sometimes these people do paid work and sometimes they volunteer. And according to HMRC, you're not allowed to do that. You have to, unless it's a very different job. And then I just sort of think about all of us that work within the charity sector and how many of our hours are spent doing paid work and how many are spent as unpaid overtime. And I don't think that's classed as volunteer time. So yeah, I think but it definitely is important to recognise that, and if you notice that it's creeping up, sort of do something about it. Just in the chat, if anyone can think of any other sort of time boundaries that they experience themselves, feel free to share. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, or if anyone wants to discuss, feel free to raise your hand, but there's no pressure. Yes, and actually this comes up, so Claire's point about being ADHD and neurodivergent, that comes up quite a lot. So working with organisations and do some coaching around how to sort of put adjustments in place for neurodivergent individuals to help them understand how to set boundaries, but also to stop people taking advantage of that, is something that I come up against quite a lot. WhatsApp groups, oh, I mean, when they work, they're amazing, but some of those groups are very overwhelming. In fact, I was saying to Phoebe before the call started, I recently moved house, and one of the things I couldn't wait to do was leave the road WhatsApp group because it was constant for things that I really didn't care about a lot of the time. And yes, Claire, going down rabbit holes on tasks, that is myself. Sometimes I feel like my laptop is like my brain, lots of tabs open all at once, and I'm getting easily distracted. Right, thank you for sharing. So we're going to go back now and look at the next boundary, which is mental boundaries. And some of these really overlap as well. So this can be a sort of limiting exposure to negativity. More and more people that I speak to now decide not to watch the news or get involved in watching the news because it can be really overwhelming. Having information overload, as I've said, there's so much content. You go onto your phone for 5 minutes to check something, and the next thing is an hour later, and you're doom scrolling reels and Instagram, because if you're like myself as well, easily distracted. Another thing that comes up quite a lot, I mean, especially in today's workplaces, we have more generations in the workplace than ever before, and very diverse workplaces. So sometimes protecting your own personal beliefs and your values in workplace debates can be really challenging, and that can cause overwhelm also. If you're in a role where you are problem solving, sometimes you just need to reset mentally. I know sometimes I get to the weekend and I think I just don't want to make any decisions. I don't want anyone to ask me for advice on anything because I spent my whole week doing that. So recognizing that sometimes you just need a break from that. Distinguishing between your own thoughts and others' opinions. Again, in the sort of information-led world that we're in, it can be really easy to be distracted by other people's opinions, and end up challenging your own thought processes. Choosing not to engage in draining discussions, and again, with lots of things that are happening in the world, that can be really challenging sometimes, especially again if it does go against your values. So recognizing that. Again, this is quite a common one, is prioritizing people that look for perfectionism instead of clarity. And again, a lot of people can be guilty of pushing for perfectionism when actually sometimes it's not perfectionism that's needed. And particularly again, in a changing world, things change all the time. So sometimes look for clarity than absolute perfectionism. Again, sort of similar to the previous time one, making sure that you have space for independent thought where you're not overwhelmed by others. And avoiding over-identifying with work achievements or failures. Sometimes we can really take those on board and bring them far too much into our personal life. And again, it seems to be a common human trait where we can hear lots of great things, but then one thing is, again, particularly for neurodivergent individuals who may have RSD or rejection sensitivity dysphoria, that can be something that really impacts in terms of boundaries. And just generally recognizing when your mental energy is depleted is another way of sort of thinking about your own boundaries. So again, with the previous one, is there anyone that's happy to share their own? Oh, Nina, feel free to unmute and share.
Hello. So yeah, I think this is really interesting, but I don't know if anybody else experiences this particular issue, but I think when you're really passionate about your work and you feel like you know the answers if they're presented to you from either young people or practitioners that you work with or whoever. And I don't know about anybody else, but I have this urge to help, and I know the answers and I can fix this for you. So then you take on all these other, I call them caseloads of everybody else's lives or work or whatever they're doing, and before you know it, you're kind of stuck in a place of wondering, why does everybody want something from me, when a lot of the time it's actually me that's facilitated that and put myself in that position. Having any boundaries around that, I've not figured it out at all, and I'll find myself on a Sunday evening in WhatsApp groups and with artists or young people and really trying to help them, and I'm just so worn out. So I've got no boundaries with it. It's more me just telling you. I just don't know if anybody else experiences that.
Yeah, there's a few nodding heads around, and I think it is something about this sector where there are people that are incredibly passionate about what they do and really want to help people. So, in a couple of slides' time, we're going to be looking at tips on how to sort of start managing those boundaries. But the first thing is to recognise it. So, thank you for sharing, Nina, because it is. Yeah, it is something that comes up. There's lots of relatables coming up in the chat. And yeah, when you have that need to help, then yeah, that is something that's relatable. Claire, you raised your hand.
I was going to say, I just really related to what, was it Nina? Sorry, that was just saying.
Nina, yeah.
It's like even in friendships and in families and with teams and with work, it's like it's all mushed together. This thing to fix things, and like you say, in our sector, there's an awful lot that needs fixing. So yeah, just saying, so on board with this. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing, Claire, because it is something that I see increasingly as people having to take time away because this has got to the stage where it's impacted them that much. And I think, but also, and I've also experienced that myself, and so it is recognizing that it's similar to the whole like put your seatbelt on before you put other people's on. It's like recognizing where you are and then putting strategies in place, and we'll cover that soon. Like I say, some of these are going to overlap, but we're going to look now at examples of emotional boundaries. And again, this sort of overlaps quite a bit with mental boundaries, but so things like separating your feelings from others' emotions, like the example on the slide there, not absorbing colleagues' stress or frustration, that can be a really difficult one. There are some people who can be real mood hoovers, and managing those people can be quite challenging because again, if you're naturally empathetic, you want to support, but you need to do it that it's not at the cost of yourself. Recognizing emotional like manipulation or guilt tripping. I'm sure we all know people that do that, and having tools on how to sort of to stop that could be really useful. But on the same sort of on the flip side of that, if you know that you have you're supporting somebody or dealing with something that does take up sort of is quite emotionally heavy, then actually planning in time to stop and reflect on that either as well. So we don't again, because we have calendars and it's like we're doing this for an hour and then we're going to do that for half an hour, and actually any time you stop and take to reflect is often really well used. So really sort of thinking about how you can use that. Avoiding emotional labour that goes beyond your role, again, is part of what a lot of people do because it's what they care, but it's almost thinking what's the limit, what's the boundary I'm going to create around that. Taking time to process feedback before responding, again, particularly if you're rejection sensitive, but in general, if you feel that you've received feedback that's unfair, it can be you can feel that you need to respond straight away, but sometimes just sitting with it for a little while can be useful. Limiting exposure. So if you're doing quite emotionally charged work, then maybe sort of thinking about limiting that to certain times. If you have a role where you do come into contact with conflict, making sure that you know when to step back from it, and just generally making sure that you protect your emotional energy just during particularly change. So change is often a time, someone who just moved house, definitely, but any sort of crisis. So any of those, like I say, I do appreciate there's a bit of overlap, but any of those particularly speak to anybody and want to share anything? Okay, I'm going to move on to physical. Sometimes this can be easier to relate to. So when it comes to physical boundaries, some of that is as simple as obviously your own personal space. Some people are huggers, some people aren't huggers, and it's respecting that that's okay for everyone to be different. Again, for whether you're a neurodivergent or that's just your preference, making sure that you know, your physical space, your physical working environment has the privacy or the quiet that you need. Taking again, people aren't very good at taking regular screen or just stretch breaks. It's very easy to get sucked into your physical environment and not move, and just sort of changing the scenery can really help. Avoiding overcommitment, so to anything that's physically demanding in terms of a physical boundary. Taking time to make your workspace ergonomically healthy. Again, I sort of think if you're sort of like in a large organization and you've had to do, you know, your display screen equipment and, you know, make sure everything's set up properly, but especially with lots of people working from home now, how often do you just sit and think, actually, is this set up exactly, you know, to suit me? Am I sort of stretching in a way? Am I working in a way that's not useful for me? Making sure that you understand your own signs of physical exhaustion. And also sort of looking at any unsafe or uncomfortable environments. So again, are there any of those that relate, or is there anything different in terms of physical boundaries that anyone would like to share?
I'm happy to share
Sophie.
with, yeah, it's all incredibly relatable, which is very validating and reassuring, but also terrifying as well, that we're also kind of overworked and overstretched. But I guess, yeah, one of the things that I've very recently learned about myself is that need to have quiet space in order to be able to do the work. And it was actually a conversation with one of my colleagues that enabled me to sort of discover that, and then with their help kind of put that in place. But it's sort of, you know, it is an ongoing process of kind of constantly sort of resharing that I need to have alone time or quiet space to actually be able to function.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's so important, and it is I say we'll start looking at remedies sort of shortly, but protecting time in your diary or protecting a physical space is an incredibly effective way. And just telling people, I think, again, so many of us have this need to people please and like, oh, I need to be available, but we don't actually, to be our best selves. We do need to protect that time, and that's absolutely fine. Some people are brilliant at it, and like a lot of us wish we could be more like that, but actually ultimately we do have a choice, and it's just about making those changes. Okay, so finally let's look at conversational boundaries, and just pick up on Claire's points.
Rachel, may I just ask something quickly?
Yes, Alice, hi.
Yeah, thanks for all the slides so far. It's so interesting, and also for people for sharing a little bit about their process. The one thing that I keep thinking about that's sticking with me from a couple of slides back is that how to not carry the sort of emotional thought process kind of burden with you into your evenings, into your weekends. I would be really interested in that is something I really struggle with, and I would be really interested to hear any like tips or tricks that other people have found that help them support them in that transition from work to, yeah, like how not to carry that, because I can't do it. But I'll let you carry on because I realize you appreciate you're on a different flow now.
No, that's absolutely fine. And we will absolutely talk about those, and there'll be time at the end as well for anybody that wants to share anything. I mean, just responding like immediately for something that I've personally done in the past. And again, different things are going to work for different people. But obviously, you know, there are times when I have to sort of support quite, you know, some sort of difficult cases and sort of deal with quite stressful things. And again, especially at home, because that is coming into your personal environment, can be quite difficult. So one of the things I started doing was a physical thing. So I actually had So if I was in work mode, I think it was either a brooch or I'd wear a badge or it was something. So that is work me. And then it's also almost at the end of the day, it was this physical. And I actually told myself that, you know, I'm taking off my brooch or badge, whatever, and I'm putting it down. And that's my work thing gone. And it's just telling yourself. And again, that's say that wouldn't necessarily work for everybody, but for me, that was my sort of way of leaving work behind, because you know, especially like sort of while I lived by myself as well, and I sort of just found I couldn't switch off. It was, and then everything would sort of tip over into, oh, I could have done that differently, could have done that, and thinking about the problems that people had and start solutionizing in the evening, and then realizing that I'm not having anything for myself. So for me, it was just doing something physical that was like, that's work me, and then this is now non-work me, and that definitely helped. But we'll move on to some of the other solutions.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a cool one. I like that. It's not time consuming at all. I thought you were going to say like go for a walk, go for an hour-long walk or something, but that's great. I like that. Take a badge on and off.
Yeah, and all of those, you know, absolutely sort of being out in nature is something that really helps me. But you don't always have time before the end of the day, and then everything you've got to do in the evening. So just a little physical thing is a sort of bit that mindset shift. Right, let's go. So finally, we'll look at conversational boundaries. So things like gossip, inappropriate topics, that can be quite overwhelming. Personal questions, sharing personal information. Some people are really happy to do that and others aren't. And again, that's absolutely fine. You know, you can choose not to discuss your private life at work, and that's fine. Also tones. So there's tones that can cross the boundary. So if people, you know, again, raising voices or having a sort of particularly sort of passive aggressive tone, that can feel like a sort of real breach of your own boundary sometimes. Sometimes as well, just when you're really busy and you get sucked into a conversation that's incredibly unproductive, again, that's another sort of boundary to consider that you can set something on. Digital chats and messages, you know, we've already discussed WhatsApps, but making sure that, you know, there's a level of professionalism. I've got called into support sort of quite a few issues where things have become unprofessional in WhatsApp chats, and it's a real fine line between banter and still, you know, having elements of fun, but not descending into something that makes others feel uncomfortable. And then banter itself, you know, it's fine not to participate, but it's finding ways to redirect banter that becomes inappropriate, or if it just feels off key with you. And yeah, and then just finding ways to keep conversations aligned with your own sort of, with the purpose of the organisation and with respect for others. So I'll just stop sharing really briefly. And again, anyone want to share? I noticed there's some chat there to see what people have been saying. Yes, Sophie, that can I just that's quite a common one when you're talking about one thing and then someone tries to bring it into something else. And there's some really good tips there as well. Padlocking your phone in the evenings, and swim after work swim session. Yep. Just again, it needs to almost be something that puts you in a different state. Right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on. And this is just a sort of like a reminder really about this issue, which we've already reflected on around the sort of the connection between boundaries and your own health. You know, when our boundaries blur or disappear altogether, it's not just like productivity that's impacted, but it really does chip away at our health and our sense of control. You know, sometimes any interruption, late night email, message that we sort of like override our own limit, it all adds up. But it is that we have to recognise it's that slow leak that eventually can lead to burnout. So it's what we can do to stop it. you know, all of those things. So constant interruptions put our brain into that flight or fight mode. The thing that we just said was, every time someone says, can I just grab you for a minute, if you've had sort of 10 of those in one day, it really can lead to feelings of anxiety. Lack of downtime, again, because of, you know, often our need to sort of help and be there for people, we will chip into our own downtime, and yet there's something deep inside us that knows that actually that's what's not going to help us in the long term. Blurred time boundaries. So again, running your own business can be really challenging because you want to be really responsive, but actually I've started just taking my work emails off my phone at the weekends and in the evening, so I don't get sucked into that. And I mean, how many of us just wake up in the night to check our phone for the time, and then the next thing you see a notification and you think, oh, I'm just going to check that email. And again, it's the next thing, it's half an hour later and we should be going back to sleep. Emotional overspill as well. So again, absorbing other people's stress or anger. It can leave us feeling really drained and detached. I've tried to say in my head more now, oh, that sounds like a you problem. I think I've struggled to say it out loud because it doesn't sound very caring, but sometimes it is just because someone's telling me something, it doesn't mean that I have to fix it. And again, that's often sort of, we get into that parent or fixer mode and it's stepping away from it. So yeah, all of these sort of things that over time they like drip away and can have that impact on our health. So I'm just going to check if I can't see if there's anything in the chat. Phoebe, is there anything additional that's come up?
Yeah, let me just read this out. So
Thank
some
you.
of these are quite challenging when it's a very small team working closely over a number of years. Sometimes people become too familiar with each other and lines become blurred.
Yeah, and that's absolutely something that comes up very frequently with organisations that I work with. But it is the only thing that's going to change that is if something's done different. And I think so either things like wellbeing check-ins in meetings can be really useful. So, you know, if that's actually made an agenda item. And I mean, the session I did last week was on difficult conversations, and I always sort of say that the time to have a difficult conversation is as soon as possible, because the longer, you know, that you don't have the conversation, the trajectory changes and the further away you get from where you need to be with things. So it is sort of recognizing there's an issue and speaking about it. The key things to do is to have that conversation. So, you know, like the first time it is, you know, we're all allowed a bad day, or, you know, we have things going on, but so you can do things like put a time limit on it and just, you know, sort of be really clear and say, you know, I am here for you, but I also, you know, I've got my own pressures having to deliver this. So can we find a time later on today, or, you know, or later in the week? And also sometimes understanding, because often, again, we go into fix mode and we straight away think, oh no, they're telling me all of this, what do I need to do? Whereas actually often people just want to be seen and they just want somebody to listen to what they're going through. They don't necessarily want a solution. And sometimes playing that back. So if someone shares something and just saying, either, you know, what are you going to do? Or, you know, is there anything you want me to do? I can't do it now. And just, it can feel really harsh the first time you say it. And it's like, you know, the first time you sort of say no to your boss, it feels really, oh no, you know, I'm going to get into trouble. But actually, unless you start putting those boundaries in place, you're permitting, and every time it happens, you are permitting that person to think, oh, that's okay, because, you know, I can go and offload on that person. And so it's preparing for that conversation, which feeds back a little bit to what I was talking about last week. So I would always prepare and just sort of say to somebody, you know, when you say this, the impact on me is that, you know, I really care about you and I really want to do something, but actually it's stopping me do my work, and then that's making me a little bit overwhelmed, and say, you know, I really don't know what to do because I want to be there for you, but I also don't want to get behind in my own work, or you know, I've got this pressure myself. So how do you think you know, we could approach this in a time that's going to work for both of us. And unless something's said, and I appreciate that sounds really easy for me just to sit here on a course and say, oh, you just have to have the conversation. But unless you do, things won't change, and it will. What then gets worse is if it gets worse and worse, and then you may get to the stage where one day you do end up just snapping, losing it, or ignoring them, and then that's not going to help you. It'll make you feel bad, it'll make them feel bad. So I would say prepare for having it's such a difficult conversation. It's not really, you know, again, it's putting your boundaries in place. But if you talk about the impact that it has on you, often I find people really don't want to, you know, it's the impact that has the impact, rather than just talking about saying, you know, oh, don't do this to me.
And Kaz put, I guess you've probably like answered this in a way because the boundaries, but just saying like some work environments encourage a culture where people are almost expected to be available at unreasonable hours, and people are made to feel like they're not a team player if they try to implement boundaries. So I suppose you've sort of covered that in implementing those boundaries and how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, like I say, the first time you agree to something, I always say it's like when I'm trying to train my dogs, you know, I had full intentions that they were never going to sleep in the bed, but I allowed them to once, and now guess what? They sleep in the bed all the time, because I do quite like it as well. But it's the same as when you're having those conversations with people. As soon as when you allow something once, you're saying that that's what you permit, that's the boundary that you've set. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to redraw the boundary. So if it is something that is really impacting you, that person isn't going to change, and which can be really tough. But yeah, I would say take some time out, prepare for the conversation, and just say it like you said to me, I really want to help you, but I have other things as well. And also just understand that sometimes people just don't necessarily want a solution, they just want to feel seen. Claire?
I just also think we've got a whole cultural thing of, that it feels selfish or that we're being mean. But actually, in another context, it would be madness for people to be talking about their personal troubles during a work day. You know, like that wouldn't be the culture of the organisation. It is not what would be expected. And I suppose this is something about us asserting our rights as you know, especially as leaders and managers, to be like, we're running our organisation today. Personal stuff might have to sit elsewhere. So yeah, I'll stop blithering, but like I say, this is very relevant.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I think selfish is seen as being a negative word, but actually sometimes we really do have to be selfish. I think, you know, we feel that we have to be selfless all the time, but actually the more we are selfless, the harder it is to be there for others. And I think we have to remind ourselves that, you know, it's absolutely okay to show up for ourselves. And often, you know, some people don't have other people looking out for them. So it's sometimes just saying, you know, what's the best thing for me? And it feels like it should be so obvious, but so often we don't do that. And even if you just sort of start on a day-by-day basis, it's like, how am I going to show up for me today? What, you know, if I look at everything that's in my diary, what one thing can I do to make sure that I don't get interrupted or don't get sucked into anything? And just start small with one thing, you know, that I'll go through in a minute. Oh, this time's going really quickly today. Lots of good chat. But we'll go through some tips and things now. And it could be, you know, you're not going to change everything overnight. So, but the more you start to do things, the more it becomes muscle memory. So let's start going through some of these. So yeah, so as we're sort of going through these, really sort of think about what matters most to you, what's really going to help. Name your boundary. It really helps to name and sort of think about it in a way. And then think about your needs. So as we're going through these, think about your own need statements. And like I say, stick and repeat, just keep doing it, stick with it. So for example, with time boundaries, again, we always like, oh, I need to do this now. But, you know, you can say it's absolutely fine to say, I'm happy to help, but I'll need to schedule it for whenever is right for you. If someone's asking you to do something, then it's okay for you to do it when it suits you. finishing work on time and not checking me emails after hours. Obviously, if you're paid to be on call or something, that's slightly different. But do you really need to check something in the evening? It's before you just click on that little icon, just think, do I need to do this or not? Blocking time, using do not disturb. There's lots of apps that can help us with this. Turning off notifications. I've turned off email notifications because I just found them so distracting, and I get so much more work done now. Be really clear on response times, because again, often we think people want things straight away, but just, you can say, I'm going to do that in 48 hours, 3 days, whatever, and just making that really clear. And making sure you take your full lunch break, because taking time away from the screen, whether you go for a walk or sit and meditate or just listen to a podcast, whatever it is, just for time away, just give your brain a break, and it makes it so much easier to go back. Who else finds that, after a week's holiday, they go back to it, I think, oh, I don't know why I was stressed, I feel great. But because it's so good for our brains just to get that time away. For mental boundaries, protecting your thoughts and values. First of all, it's just recognizing when you're mentally overloaded and saying no. It's absolutely fine to say no, and give you can say no, or again, it can feel uncomfortable, but if someone wants you to do something else, say, well, I was going to do this, so I can do that or this, which, what should I be prioritizing? Also, before you get involved in things, just try not to get engaged in anything, debates or anything that crosses your personal values. Again, it's fine to say no and not get involved. And also, so I sort of think about from a productivity point of view, if you've got individuals that have pet projects and are getting involved in things that don't necessarily align to you, like your overall objectives, it can be the same for you. If you want to get involved in something, if it doesn't really align with yourself, then again, it's okay to say no to that. Try to avoid multitasking. So, one playlist, one tab, one brain, just do one thing at a time. There's things like the Pomodoro technique, I don't know if anyone's heard of, but where you set amount of time to focus and then have a break. And then, just protecting your headspace from like emails, negative Slack or WhatsApp spirals. In terms of emotional boundaries, what I was saying previously, you can listen empathetically without actually taking on someone else's load, saying things like, I'm really sorry that you're having a hard time. I want to help, but I also need to protect my own space. Is absolutely fine. You might just have to practice saying it a few times in the mirror before you say it in front of someone else. And again, if you think that you're being guilt tripped or emotionally manipulated, try not to take the bait. Give yourself permission to sort of really step back from those situations, and just avoid emotional labour creep. If you think that you might be being everyone's like unofficial unpaid therapist at work, that might be how they see you. So it might not happen overnight, but maybe sort of make yourself a 5-step plan of how you will step away from that. For physical boundaries, obviously think about your physical space. Ask people if they are okay with a hug. If you're not comfortable, don't feel like you have to. Think about your physical space where you can work with focus. Again, screen breaks, stretch breaks, walks are all really important. Making sure you take that rest and recovery time, it's so important. And if actually you feel it's an unsafe work environment, it's okay to say no, and just say why it feels that way. And then finally, with conversational boundaries, so sort of helping managing topics and tone and styles, redirecting gossip. Again, it can be difficult when you're in a small office or whether you're in a small team, but again, practice saying, I'm really not comfortable talking about that, or let's focus on what we can do about something rather than get sucked into the issues. focus on solutions, and if there's nothing that can be done, then leave it alone. If something feels intrusive, practice saying, you know, that's not something I want to discuss right now or at all. Thinking about your personal information, and if you do choose to confide in someone, you know, make sure that they know that it's confidential and that you don't expect it to be shared. And again, often in meetings, if again often happens, people get sidetracked, and you end up sort of going off track, then, you know, bringing people back into the room of what's been done, because the chances are, if you've noticed it, other people have as well, and they'll be grateful for you bringing it back. And banter is such a challenging thing, because I think with a lot of the changes of law that are coming in as well, people almost feel there's going to be a banter ban, and it's not that at all, but it is recognising, obviously, that anything that and it's obviously people's perception, if it's going to cause someone harm, or their perception is that it's not healthy, then it's about their perception, not the person that's delivering it. And I often say, if you for a split second think, I'm not sure if I should say that, I would generally say don't say it. Or if you feel yourself getting sucked in, then point out that it may be inappropriate. So obviously I've realised I've galloped through those, but I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. I'm just going to pick up on the chat, and then if anyone else has got anything, please feel free to raise your hand. So first of all, just picking up on Sophie, the wellbeing check-ins are helpful. Yes, it can be really useful. In a previous organisation, we've actually done it in the sort of the boxes, so you can get people to say which part of them feels that they're okay, which parts of them feel that they're verging on burnout or verging on overwhelm, and you can almost sort of do it on a scale. And if everyone puts where they are on the scale, and you check in on that every month, then that gives you've actually got something objective that you can refer back to. And then you can also go back and say, you know, if someone was feeling well, what was happening in that space that made it good, in terms of, and then also if things are getting too much, start to really drill down on what's causing that. Nina, I feel like my distractions have actually become addictions in my life. Yes. Bedtime procrastinations on social media. Yes. Anything as a distraction from multiple lists and unmanageable responsibilities. Delete all the apps that shouldn't be on and then find something else. Yes, I can absolutely relate to that, Nina. I think when the rest of sort of life is over, is quite distracting and overwhelming, it's quite easy to sort of find yourself in that hole. And I guess what, you know, to say, look at things that are away from the screen can be useful, but all of these things take time. And I think often we feel like we sort of like all or nothing. It's like, I'm going to delete everything that's distracting, and that's just not realistic. I'd say anything that you approach, think about, you know, is it a 5-step plan or a 10-step plan that's going to get me, and not beat myself up if it doesn't quite go right in the first time. Sending help, sending positive vibes to you, Nina. Claire, I had a good language tip of saying I don't instead of I can't, as it's clear, definite. It makes it a bit easier to avoid justifying your decision and being apologetic. Yes, it's very British to apologise all the time. But yes, using I don't sets a really clear boundary straight away. And actually, you know, using the language of, you know, this is a boundary for me. Literally had flashbacks and conversations with my mum. Mother, this is a boundary for me. I do not wish to discuss this. But you know, it's okay to say that, and if we don't say it, then people don't know.
I think it's just a observation that I've been reflecting on. It's just this whole idea of the being assertive or being factual can be seen as negative or aggressive, when in fact it is neutral. You know what I mean? I just almost feel like you say, it's clearly a collective issue, but it's one that I've really been wrestling with. But like you say, it is okay. We're doing our jobs. We are doing the function we need to do, and for us not to think we're being mean when we're being entirely neutral and getting the thing done that needs to be done. So yeah, It's like
Can
give
I,
everyone
can
permission.
I just add to that as well, Claire, and just say that I think sometimes like no one's going to die. Like I feel like sometimes I don't know about anyone else, but the amount of I put on everything that I'm doing, I just don't understand why everything has to be to this extreme. And so just having them boundaries sometimes and just saying, well, no. It's like nothing's going to change really. I don't think we're not surgeons unless people are here, secretly, but we're not out there. We have effects on people's lives. Of course we do with the line of work that we do. I'm pretty sure that everybody does in this room, but I'm pretty sure that just because we say no, that no one's going to keel over. So I don't think it's that serious sometimes, and I think maybe that's our own fault with putting this kind of serious mentality on the things that we do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Nina. And yeah, I say we get so worried about upsetting people when, like I say, the only person we end up hurting is ourselves. And if you think it was a physical thing, if somebody was doing something that physically hurt you, you would just say, please stop doing that because it hurts me. And yet, for some reason, we have this mind block about when it comes to our sort of mental or emotional health or well-being. But it's just as important to say, what you're doing is hurt me might sound a bit over dramatic, but just saying it crosses a boundary with me, or it makes me feel uncomfortable, or as Claire said, I don't believe in that, tolerate that, whatever it happens to be. I'm really conscious of time. Let's see how much. There was a couple of activities which I'm going to skip over just in case there's any more questions. So just sort of there to reflect there, if you are receiving like late emails, and again, sometimes with flexible working, people are sending these things and they don't necessarily expect a response, but it's the pressure we put on ourselves. So I must admit, me personally, I would probably just ignore it till the next day. But if you feel that you have to respond, then something like B is probably a bit softer. It's not quite as direct, but you're also managing expectations. And then with this one, and again, this is something that resonates quite a lot, is if someone does keep constantly interrupting your flow with non-urgent questions, it is one of those, if you just don't say anything for ages, then you potentially more likely just to get to the A as an outburst, rather just manage expectations and just say, I'm in focus mode, I'll be available whenever. If you're working remotely, use your do not disturb, use your absent thing, block time out in your calendar. If you're in a physical environment, I know that I used to put headphones on if I was sat at my desk just to almost like pretend I was on a call, but I also know other places where they will just put like blocks on their desk, and red is do not disturb, yellow is, if it's urgent, interrupt me, green is that's fine if you want to interrupt me. So, if just find something that works for everyone. So I'm conscious that we've literally got a couple of minutes left. So I was just going to ask everyone to think about a boundary that they'll protect and better from now on, and how they'll communicate it. So maybe if you do that, something to take away for yourself, because ultimately that's who you have to make the deal with. You're making the deal with yourself to make things better. And then just a little reflection. So one of the key things about boundaries from that is self-respect. It's respecting yourself and demanding respect from others, which is fine. And linking back to my dance analogy, because I like to, but protecting your rhythm generally means that the whole group can stay in beat.